It's Bernard Nomberg with the Nomberg Law Firm. We're back for another Tuesday Talk on the Law. And I got my buddy Chip Nation here. Chip, I appreciate you coming on this morning.
Thanks for inviting me.
And Chip's a local guy who has a practice up in Jasper, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But today we're going to talk about an area of the law that a lot of folks in this part of the state may or may not be aware of, but it's part of Chip and his partner Jimmy Warren's practice in Jasper is on black lung cases, and we're going to talk for a couple of minutes about Chip and his background and where he's from and all of that, and let's get after it. Chip,
Okay.
I appreciate you being on this morning, and
Thanks, Bernard.
I know you were born or raised in Jasper, and
That's right.
Went to high school there, and eventually found your way to Birmingham. Though you
That's
currently
right.
live here, but go to Jasper for work.
That's right. It's been 14 years now,
Okay.
15 including clerking,
Mhm.
but grew up in Jasper. My father was a circuit judge for several years, and he still practices there. And went off to college and found my way to Cumberland to law school, and never left Birmingham after that. But due to my roots, just decided to go back to Jasper to practice.
Of course. And you and Jimmy have been in practice together for how long now?
My whole tenure, so 14
Okay.
years.
Excellent,
14 years.
excellent. And I suspect you know a couple of decent barbecue restaurants in Walker County.
There's some good ones, some famous ones too.
Well, let's talk about Warren and Associates. Let's
Okay.
tell the folks what do you guys do? What kind of work do you handle?
We do mainly personal injury, which to me includes workers' compensation, products liability, Social Security disability. Market ourselves as a personal injury law firm.
Sure,
But of course, in a small town, you're willing to do other things to help people. Not everybody knows who to go to or who does what, so you can't totally specialize. But
Right.
but as much as we can, that's what we do.
Well, it's in Walker County, just north of Birmingham and Tuscaloosa area. That's a unique geographic area of the state. I know that the black lung cases have been around for decades, and your firm, as part of your practice, y'all handle those.
That's right.
Let's talk about that for a few minutes.
Okay.
As far as I know from our discussions, the current coal mines that really are active anymore are in Tuscaloosa and Jefferson counties.
Right, that's right. Walker County for decades and decades had several underground coal mines. And I think there's still a strip pit or two operational, but mainly, as far as I know, in Alabama, the only operational underground coal mines are in Jefferson and Tuscaloosa.
But a lot of, and I know you guys have handled those cases for years, but a lot of folks probably live in Walker County, but
That's right.
work in those other counties,
That's right.
those coal mines.
And both coal mines in Tuscaloosa and in Jefferson are both fairly close to Walker County.
Oh, sure, sure.
So yeah, you do have a lot of residents of Walker County that work in those mines.
Now, a typical workers' compensation case in Alabama is when somebody gets hurt working on the job for an employer, whether you're a state employee, and that's a whole different type of work comp case, or federal. But what we're talking about is when somebody's working for private employment, and that company, the employer, is subject to the Alabama Workers' Compact.
That's right.
Now, within that are cases that what we as lawyers call black lung cases. Why don't you talk a little bit about what is a black lung case, what type of a person gets affected, and let's delve into that a few minutes.
Okay. Well, simply, to bore you for a second, but to give you the legal definition.
Sure.
Occupational pneumoconiosis, or a lot of times in a coal mine situation, we just call it coal miner's pneumoconiosis or black lung, is simply inhaling coal dust and rock dust. Okay, I mean, that is the baseline definition. But what goes into it is most of the time you see coal miners who've worked many decades, 2 or 3 decades in the mines, and they, as they get older, they say, well, I'm getting short of breath, or just not able to do what I was used to do, which, of course, part of it could be age, but many of these guys feel like, hey, there's more to it than just age.
Sure.
So those guys, we'd recommend go see your doctor, go see a pulmonologist, tell him your work history, and you've been around coal dust and rock dust, and see what he says. You have to have a medical diagnosis in order to pursue a case. But based on your work history, a lot of these guys find that something is more wrong than just old age. Or
Is it, Chip, let me ask you, the folks that pursue these type of claims, do they typically become symptomatic and have issues going on, and that's what leads them to the doctor?
That's usually what happens. I think a lot of people, especially when you're focusing on, I need to get a certain amount of years in. I'm having these issues, but I don't really want to do anything about it right now. I think a lot of people put it off.
Right.
So we often see people at the end of their career say, hey, I've been dealing with this for 10, 15 years, but I was able to keep going. And I went and saw my personal doctor, and he said, hey, you got asthma or something. Well, I would recommend to those people, go see a pulmonologist and tell them your work history and the environment you were in, and see if it's not something more than asthma, or it could be what they call occupational asthma, which would fit under the umbrella of occupational pneumoconiosis.
Probably, I suspect a lot of these folks just don't want to know what's going on with them from a health standpoint. They may be scared to know. I mean, it's common. I mean, I think it's human nature. A lot of folks just don't want to know what may be going on with their body.
That's right.
Plus, I think another factor may be that these folks are high wage earners.
That's right.
And they don't want to not be working and earning for their family. So I understand the tug there that they may put it off.
Right.
Other than coughing and shortness of breath, what other symptoms that folks may initially experience and that may make them or need for them to go get diagnosed, to get tested?
Having trouble breathing at night would be one. If you've realized, hey, I need an extra pillow here to sleep well at night. Wheezing, coughing with sputum production. But shortness of breath, I would say, is the telltale.
Is the number one
sign. And again, if you or I are short of breath, we don't work in a dusty environment per se. So if we went to the doctor and he might say, well, you've got a respiratory infection, or maybe you have asthma. But these guys who work in this environment are more apt to have a work-related breathing issue, and makes them susceptible to it. So I would encourage, anybody with a breathing issue who's worked in the mines to don't just go to your personal doctor, go to a specialist.
Now, the specialist being a pulmonologist who's a lungs specialist. And what type of test do they undergo, if you know?
They'll do a chest x-ray, which in state cases, you don't have to have necessarily a positive chest x-ray.
Right.
You just have to have a diagnosis. And then they'll put you through the breathing procedures. They'll get you to blow a balloon up, basically, but it'll have some ability to tell what your lung capacity is and if your lungs are operating correctly, or if there's a restrictive or obstructive defect.
What kind of treatment is there, or is there treatment for folks once they've been diagnosed?
There's really no treatment for black lung. However, if you do have COPD or asthma, that the doctor says, hey, there's no other, maybe you're not a smoker, but you have COPD.
Right.
There's no other good explanation for why you have it. There are treatments for those particular lung processes or lung diseases, but, still you may have an occupational disease, even if it's just diagnosed as asthma or COPD.
Right. I guess getting out of the mine and no longer doing that job is probably the best way for the injured or the diagnosed worker to get some relief.
Exactly. Almost all doctors on even the ones hired by the coal company will tell you, hey, if you have black lung, you don't need to go back to the
get
mines.
out of that environment.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the other conditions you just mentioned, asthma and COPD. What other or is that all the other conditions that you typically have seen that if they're not diagnosed with black lung, or maybe even if they are, those are also corresponding conditions that they may also have?
Well, under the umbrella of occupational pneumoconiosis, and we have figured this out through litigation, that you better plead occupational pneumoconiosis in your complaint and not
Right.
coal workers pneumoconiosis.
Right. More a bigger
right.
swath or a bigger umbrella
That's
diagnosis.
Right. That's right.
Okay.
You can bring in potentially the asthma, if it's called occupational asthma or COPD or any type of restrictive lung disease. So when you go to the pulmonologist and do those breathing tests,
Right.
if you're abnormal on any of those, you may be diagnosed with something, and we can talk
Sure.
about a pneumoconiosis case. And it's not just related to coal workers. I mean, people who, there's silicosis,
That's what I was going to ask you.
aluminosis.
Right.
I don't generally see those cases, but they are in Alabama. People that work in plants where any kind of dust that they breathe in that causes them problems, that is in any job that makes them more susceptible to breathing in dust and
Right.
causing these issues, I would go see a pulmonologist and have him evaluate you.
Not to put you or me on the spot from a medical standpoint,
Right.
but from a layperson's understanding, when someone's breathing in that dust or the coal, the fine fibers, does it then, the problem that becomes is because it creates a coating of the inner lining of the lungs, and that's what creates the inability to have full lung capacity in breathing?
That's right.
Is that your understanding
That's
of
right.
what goes on? Do you see any other professions besides the coal miners and others who may work in plants where there's that kind of a dust? Any other professions you guys have seen where similar diagnoses and you've pursued cases?
Yeah, any type of plant where cotton is present in small fibers. Welders are susceptible to breathing in fine particles. And, you know, I've talked about underground coal miners, but above
Right.
ground coal miners, you know, there's a lot of rock dust on the surface.
Sure.
So, you know, we've had, I would say, more than likely you're going to find an underground coal miner to have issues, but we have had issues with above ground coal miners. So even if you work in a strip pit, you're potentially capable of getting pneumoconiosis.
Chip, what is the time period for which a person has in order to make a claim to go forward?
From the time you realize or have been diagnosed, that's called the injury date, and you have 2 years in state court to file a lawsuit from the time of the injury. That would be, so if you're retired, if you just recently retired, it's going to be 2 years from your last date of work, not just your retirement date, but
The last date of exposure?
exactly
In the workplace?
Right. And you
Okay.
have to have, in pneumoconiosis, you have to have 12 months in being exposed to the dust. Unlike other occupational diseases, we don't have to have, you know, a certain amount of time in. You
Sure,
just have to have
sure.
the exposure. So it is a little bit different, treated a little bit differently in the law. But the main thing for everybody to realize is you want to do something about it within 2 years of last being exposed.
Because if you don't, then potentially you lose your legal rights to
That's
pursue
right.
those cases.
That's exactly right.
But we're talking today about state court claims. We're not talking about federal court claims.
That's right. And my firm and myself just handle state court. There's not many of us that do it, but we're one of a handful.
Sure.
Most people, and there's not a ton of these people either, but most people do the federal black lung. And that is what I find the miners are more familiar with. I
Sure.
think through their union and so on and so forth, they really preach federal black lung if you think you have an issue.
Do you know if folks can pursue both state and federal?
You can pursue both,
Okay.
and if we reach a resolution in your state court, it doesn't prohibit you from going forward
Oh,
with your
that's good to
federal.
know. That's
Yeah.
good to know. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, and I apologize. How can folks get in touch with you and Jimmy Warren at your firm?
Yeah, our website is warrenassociates.com, spell out and. My phone number is 205-221-1044, or you can email me at chip@warrenassociates.com.
Okay, and you'll be glad that if anybody has black lung or similar type breathing claims, and particularly if you're Walker County or any of the contiguous counties in this part of the state, to please get in touch with Chip and see
Absolutely.
if you have a claim to
Absolutely.
pursue.
We'd love to help you.
Chip, let me ask you, once somebody pursues one of these claims, we'll say in state court, do you necessarily have trials in these cases, or and I know every case is different, but what's
Right.
typically, what happens with these cases?
Well, it's just like any other workers' compensation case. As you would know, you
Sure.
file your lawsuit, you do discovery. They'll probably want to take a deposition or two.
Mhm.
May have to go take a doctor's deposition. And as with the trend in most litigation nowadays, we try to settle these cases after a certain point. And most of the time, we're able to do that. But at the end of the day, if you can't, there's a trial waiting on us.
Certainly.
And, there's
You're always working toward that trial.
That's right.
But we can resolve it anytime prior to
Exactly,
that.
exactly. And I would say more often than not, we're able to resolve it.
Mhm.
But of course, never a promise we make when we go into a case, because you just never know.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Chip, this has been some very informative information. I certainly appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today.
I appreciate you having me. Brian.
Absolutely. Guys, again, this is Chip Nation with Warren and Associates in Jasper. Let's shout out that phone number one more time.
Yeah, it's 205-221-1044.
Okay, and again, I'm Bernard Nomberg with Nomberg Law Firm. You know, we come to you every Tuesday morning, talk about a different area of the law or something fun that's going on in Alabama. I can always be reached at 205-930-6900. You know, our website is nomberglaw.com. We're on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us. We'll be back next Tuesday on another area of the law, and we hope you guys have a good rest of your week.